Welcome to this week's OK at Work with myself, Sarah Sawyer, and my colleague Russell Berger, both attorneys at Offit Kurman. And today we are talking about wage and hour law, always a really exciting topic. But we're talking about specifically about classification issues and misclassification. So employers classify their employees as either exempt or non-exempt. And most clients that I have are familiar with that concept, have a very blanket statement about exemption status in their handbook, but sometimes don't give a whole lot of thought to whether they have properly classified exempt individuals. So people who they're paying salary to. And I've definitely seen that as companies grow as well, and they get more and more people in certain positions that, they might end up having 5 or 6 people that are classified as exempt in a certain position and not really be giving a lot of thought to whether they're properly classified. So what are some things that people should consider when it comes to exempt versus non-exempt status in those situations, Russell?
Yeah, well, the starting point is particularly if you have groups of employees with that are large, a high volume, large number of employees in the same type of position. You should definitely spend a little bit of time in making sure that you have them properly classified as exempt or non-exempt. Because what can happen is these cases can easily be brought as class actions or what's known as a collective action, which means if you had 50 employees in the same job classification and you have one disgruntled former employee who decides to sue you, you could end up defending claims from multiple employees in that same classification, conceivably all 50. So it's really important that you get out in front of it so you avoid the class action risk of it all. But really, from a substantive standpoint, you know, we hear a lot of the time like, well, I pay this person a salary, so they must be exempt, right? Um, no, that's not sufficient. And that's because the test here is often multi-factor, and there's a whole bunch of different exemptions. But at the high level, the most common exemptions require both a job duties test, meaning they're doing substantive work that qualifies as exempt, often because it's administrative work, and that's not like paper pushing administrative work. That's usually back office administrative to the business as opposed to, client facing, but of a high enough level that it's sophisticated enough that it qualifies for the exemption. So, for example, that's things like accounting, billing, HR, quality control, things that are kind of back end administrative functions of the business. There's also professional exemptions, which are folks that have usually are licensed, so they have to satisfy that job duty component as well. Um, and then there's also the executive exemption. That's usually for supervisors of two or more full-time or full-time equivalent employees. So those are just some of the job duties that have to be in play. So you can't just give someone a salary and say, oh, it's sufficient. And then additionally, there's also a minimum salary. In some cases, there are certain hourly rates that can get by, even though it's not a weekly salary. But point being that it's fairly complicated and fairly nuanced. And if you make one small wrong step in here, you could be facing a class action. So really important to get it right from the start.
Yeah, especially because if you're misclassified someone, you may not be tracking their hours. Likely you are not. And so a lot of those positions that you've mentioned, some of these ones that are more in the gray area about where they could maybe be exempt, maybe non-exempt, maybe working a lot of hours to get their jobs done. So that can really increase the exposure and the overtime risk there as far as, the amount of time they're spending and not knowing the amount of time they're spending, but knowing that they're spending a lot of time, right? So definitely can balloon into a much bigger issue. It starts as something small, and we definitely see this with growing companies. And you're talking about the class action piece of this is that they start out with the risk is fairly small originally, and then as they grow, this problem it just multiplies, and all of a sudden we start looking under the hood and it's pretty messy under there, and it can create a big issue and really get out of hand fast and get very expensive. I mean, just these cases are so expensive.
Yeah, well, right, because not only can it grow into multiple people, but under the federal law, the penalty, the exposure, the liability can be doubled. Under Maryland law, it can be tripled. Even though DC also uses the same term, treble damages, it's actually being quadrupled in DC. So there's a lot of potential exposure when you go from one person who has a $5,000 problem that could be doubled, could be tripled, and then could be multiplied out by 10, 20, 50, 100 employees. I mean, that can really, really add up. So when you put it in those contexts, to me, it makes a lot of sense to do the compliance work and have a lawyer review the job description and make sure that there's proper classification up front.
Yeah. Great advice. Well, thanks, Russell. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Sarah.